I see hands going up. I think there was one in front here first. This gentleman in the second row. I'm going to try and do my best to call upon the hands that go up in a certain order, right? So you have to help me. Yes.
Hello. Jordan Mccray from Humdinger Wind Energy. So I have two questions. The first question, since we're still on policy, is you mentioned, many of you mentioned that the resource is just not there in the beginning. It's a little bit hairy for wind in terms of the land. It's good on the coast, and for solar, it's just not there. But I think, Robin, you mentioned that China is still a leader in solar thermal, but there's nothing there for PV. Same resource, different technology. But it's still, a huge difference there. If you can speak a little bit to what is the policy? Germany is another good example. It doesn't have the best wind resource, but it's the world leader in wind energy. What types of policies enable us to get past the resource problem, and what's the logic behind those policies?
Okay, I'm going to ask you to hold it because we're running into our last 20 minutes of time, and I want as many questions and comments as possible, so perhaps we can then see how our guest can pick up on the various questions. Yes?
Yeah, so I guess what I learned today is that renewable energy is like a natural resources, right? Some places are abundant, some places are less abundant. The second thing I learned today was that in Hong Kong it's fairly difficult, all the engineering and economic challenges it takes to create renewable energy. So the thought that occurred to me was, wouldn't the solution be the renewable energy credit, where you could just slice through all of this, basically build renewable energy plants where they are abundant, where there's an abundance of renewable energy, and create a market to trade this renewable energy.
Right. I think there were more questions at the back. Yes?
Fabian Pedicini from the Greenland Tower Association. We quite rightly talk about energy.
It's hard to hear.
We quite rightly talk about energy efficiency and renewables, but not so much about conservation. And perhaps this is something that should be given a greater stress on, considering that there are things that can be done simply by avoidance. We can reduce our energy requirements, so thereby increasing the percentage which renewable energy will have on the energy market. For example, we see in Hong Kong shopping arcades that leave their doors open and the air conditioning on, high-powered reflectors just to light commercial advertisements, or building being lit, or for example a room like this one with the curtains down but hundreds of lights on while it would not be necessary. Perhaps it is necessary to disassociate the power generation from the profit of power companies, so that power companies will have the incentives not just to go into energy efficiency, but also into energy conservation.
Okay, I think the point is well understood. I guess there was another hand. Yes?
I think energy have two things. Basically, there's a usage. Electricity and the internal combustion engine. That means using the fossil fuel. And I want to know is there is a tendency for the Chinese government to shift to electrical vehicles. That means there's a model change on the energy usage from fossil fuel energies. That means internal combustion engines to electricities. And that how it will affect the renewable plants.
Okay. The question at the back.
Thanks. Jerry Lee from Hitachi Limited. Just to add on the speaker's comment or the fourth comment about the selection between energy efficiency and new energy resources. I came across a number of conferences and people well, one time and asked about the T&D laws in Hong Kong, and KK Richard, correct me if I'm wrong. I read from the IEA report last year saying that the T&D loss in Hong Kong is kind of like 12%, which is the level of developing countries. And, well, there are huge investments that we are making here in renewables, but, well, there are yet another way to save energy, like if you compare with Singapore, for example, the T&D is talking about 5-6%. So I wonder if we can do a little bit more on the, like for example, the T&D part of the electric system.
Other questions, comments? Yes.
Can I ask, Richard, how CLP is preparing for the reality of carbon pricing coming in, especially in the Hong Kong economy, when that happens?
Okay. Well, anyway, was there one more question here in front? Please.
It's just answering the question that the T&D loss in Hong Kong, I think we are actually one of the lowest in the world. We are around 4.5%. So I think sort of maybe you get the information from somewhere else, but I just need to confirm.
Perhaps I can ask the panel to pick up on the questions that you want to answer. Oh, one more question. Is that right?
My name is Jess Peep from Green Future. I have a question on the CLP project, the wind project in Hong Kong. According to the information, the 200 megawatt wind farm will generate 1% of electricity consumption for Hong Kong. That means 0.04 billion kilowatt hour annually. That takes the question that the wind farm, the capacity factor of the wind farm, that must be reached 25%. According to my knowledge, even some very good wind site in China or in Guangdong may not reach that level. And some information from the HEC experience is that the Lemma wind turbine can just reach a capacity factor of 12 to 13%. If I'm wrong, please correct me, some people from the HEC. So is it realistic to have such an estimation on the power production for the wind farm in Hong Kong? Thank you.
Okay. As I said, please pick up the questions that you feel you want to answer most. Richard.
Shall I start then?
Yes.
Firstly, perhaps I'll just supplement the comment about the losses in the electrical system. My colleague, Mr. Poon, is absolutely right. He knows the figures exactly. But the reason Hong Kong has a very efficient system is because we have short distances. If you have long distances, you have higher losses. So Hong Kong does have a very efficient power system. There was a question about the offshore wind farm over here. The capacity factor that you've calculated is about right, about 25%. It is higher than if we were to build a wind farm onshore, and that's because the strength, the average wind speed offshore is slightly higher than onshore. The amount of energy that's produced from a wind farm is very much dependent on the average wind speed. So offshore we have more consistent and slightly stronger wind. We're at the point where we're above the 6 meters per second. We would like it to be higher, but we need to do some further, more detailed wind measurements to optimize the site, and hopefully we'll be able to raise that up a little bit higher. But your numbers are about right. There's a question here about CLP preparing for carbon pricing. We have been alert to the impact of carbon pricing for a number of years. We have developed a carbon strategy. It's called our 2050 Carbon Vision. Part of that strategy is assessing the impact of carbon pricing in all our investment decisions. When we make investment decisions now, we're looking at assets which could last for 40 or 50 years. So it's very important that we take future risks into consideration. That strategy has led us to massive investments in renewable energy. It's led us to take a heightened interest in nuclear power. We're looking at, where we can, developing natural gas instead of coal, because the carbon emissions from natural gas are about half what they are from coal. We're also looking at developments in carbon capture and storage. So combined with work that we're doing on energy efficiency and conservation, we see that as being a comprehensive program that will help us manage our risks going forward. And I'll just say something finally to Fabian's question at the back. Yes, when we talk about energy efficiency, we say energy efficiency and conservation in the one breath. We see that there's two aspects: to be not only more efficient, but also to be using energy more wisely.
Alexis?
Okay, maybe I just talk about the question on technology and policy. I think when we do our RE assessment a few years ago, we look at different technology. Actually, we try also actually look at biomass. But when choosing finally what to actually do, we have to kind of choose on mature technology at that point. And from experience, when some new technology come up, it takes probably a few decades for that to mature, to be applied. So the question of whether there are additional ones which are not in the horizon, there probably are many. But to make that feasible for the discussion, we are talking about 80% 2050. I don't think those are in line here. But then certainly for the mature technology, I agree with a lot of discussion here, policy need to be tilted to encourage those to be more adaptable. That's the point I think is repeated many times. And repeating, I think what Richard just said is certainly when we talk about generation, it's so much to so difficult to generate a small part, but then it's so much easier to save. But then at the end, you can only save up to a certain extent. You still need generation.
Okay, pick up on your comment. About a month ago, there was a solar conference in the United States, and particularly focusing on solar thermal. And one of the people who did a podcast afterwards basically put forward the following comparison of costs in terms of energy absorbed by the relative technology. For a $40,000 US PV installation in the United States, you could install a solar thermal installation that would cost only $6,000 US. So the approximate for the equivalent amount of energy that's actually absorbed by the system. So therefore, really, the issue is one of cost. It's issue of prioritization of how you deploy your capital. China is deploying its capital into solar thermal, into water heaters, because it's very efficient and you can roll it out in scale. And you can get 7 of them to 1 PV. There will come a time when PV comes down and that equation changes. But for now, it's most efficient to use solar thermal.
I'll just pick up on the conservation point, because I think it's worth agreeing that you know, the energy efficiency stuff is not purely a technology issue. There's very few technologies that are actually sort of plug and play. You know, you pop them into an installation and suddenly everything's all right. And from a carbon perspective, we see, you know, that the two obvious ones are video conferencing and chillers. I mean, you know, a lot of places have spent a lot of money on these kinds of technologies, and they're not operating in an optimized fashion, and there are big savings to be gained by just using the technology better. And that only works if you engage the people that use them. So there's certainly a big opportunity there, and of course these measures are comparatively low cost and don't require major capital investment. The way to get at it is you need a management system, particularly in a commercial enterprise. I think one of the interesting things that we're seeing, you know, energy efficiency, I hate to say this to my colleagues in the sector, but it's boring, right? It's not the kind of issue that people get excited about. And having worked for an NGO, I know this because we run campaigns on energy efficiency and look at the response rate. So part of the issue here is about how you get people to care about energy efficiency, and it's not easy. One of the things that we're doing is to convert energy into a carbon footprint, and convert carbon footprint into future of the planet, and get people to monitor and track their carbon footprints as a way of engaging people about why this is important. tons of carbon versus kilowatt hours is a lot more meaningful. So, I mean, I think the way that we communicate this issue to our clients and the public is critical, actually, in terms of getting these conservation wins out of the system.
Hi, I just want to respond to a question about carbon credit trading. In fact, carbon credits has been traded for the last couple of years already. The most matured and the biggest market is the EU ETS system, emission trading system. And China currently, as a developing country, they don't need to bear any emission reduction obligation. So they are net exporter or seller of credit as well under the CEL system, under the Kyoto Protocol. The question obviously is that Kyoto is going to expire soon by year 2012. So what's going to happen will depends very much upon the outcome of the discussion in Copenhagen before the end of this year. I also want to respond to the capacity factor discussions. In our experience, probably the best performing wind farms in China can achieve a capacity factor of in excess of 30%. The world-class wind farms in Australia, particularly South Australia, will be in excess of 40%. So I wouldn't say 25% is not achievable, even for the Hong Kong seawaters. But more importantly, perhaps, is that apart from the capacity factor, we also need to look at other quality of the wind that you're going to get. For example, the turbulence. You may have a very good capacity factor, but the turbulence effect can kill you. So that's why one of the good things of developing offshore wind farms is that the wind resource is very uniform there. There will be low terrain, there will be low buildings, hills to block the wind and create the turbulence. So that's the very good thing. Otherwise, your turbine will not going to last for too long.
Right. Well, I think what we've learned today is quite a wide spectrum of issues relating to energy and particularly renewable energy. I hope this is useful for many of us who are not not so expert in the area. But one of the some of the other things that we want to bear in mind is we are part of China, and China is one of what Robin calls a disruptive market. What a disruptive market means is that this particular factor, the China factor, is it disrupts in a sort of positive sense, in a sense that it could bring forth changes, both policy as well as technology, management, within a very, very short period of time. Secondly is we can be, I think it's important, I mean, some of the underlying questions that I'm sensing from you is, well, why go into wind power at all in Hong Kong? Is it worthwhile for Hong Kong to go into that, or should we just forget about that? Should we pile that kind of money that we would put in a wind farm? What if we piled it into conservation and energy efficiency? Would that be better? Shall we forget about solar? Maybe Hong Kong will never have anything meaningful solar power. All these attempts to think about putting it on the rooftop, is it worthwhile? Now, these are probably some of the ideas that you have. Now, also, some of the answers that are coming up is, well, for example, even for China, are there some things that we can just forget about? Well, China's policy is we can't afford to forget anything. Now, of course, this is in the nature of a very large country in the world. They're not going to give up on any technology. CCS, for example, carbon capture and sequestration, they're interested on the research side. They're not yet so interested in the rolling out side. For example, solar, as we heard from Robin, yes, they're interested in developing solar, but maybe from a certain perspective, and not other perspectives. So you can see a very large country that is actually spending a lot of time on the research and the policy area, thinking about what it should do at any one time. However, the picture is dynamic. It's not standing still. The new technologies that may come on could be, again, disruptions to decisions that people are going to make. Also, as we're talking about current day people who are investing in businesses, they have to think very carefully, and I think, Richard, you've helped us to understand that. You're looking at the pot of money that you have, and you have to at least be reasonably confident today that you're going to get your return back, and therefore you are going to be reasonably cautious in how you make a particular investment. But again, what I think is interesting looking at CLP Power is, wow, you have a lot of renewable investments in different parts of the world. So as a company, you're obviously very much into the renewable potentials. So what I just want to close on is perhaps just run through the NDRC outline plan again, just to give us a sense that even though we're in Hong Kong, a very small spot in southern China, when we look at renewable power, when we look at energy and what our role might be from here, when we look at Hong Kong, perhaps we can look at ourselves as a collective. We can look at it in terms of policy, but also businesses, individuals, the professionals, and so on. So the Chinese government would like to see equipment manufacturing for the energy sector and the clean energy systems very much as part of something in southern China, in the PRD. We've heard from KK that, well, actually we don't seem to be exploiting the collective experience and technical power that we do have there. Perhaps we may see in the next 5 years a transformation of what the manufacturing sector will do here. So people who are in textiles, we're already beginning to see the textile and garment sector wanting to be much more energy efficient. We're going to see other sectors following the same. And perhaps, even though land prices is much higher, we don't know, therefore, that certain types of new industries, like renewable power, is going to want to locate there for where they need a lot of land. Right? So that's something we'll look at. If we look at infrastructure and generation, we have some projects here, and I don't know what the answer is. In terms of Hong Kong going into wind power, are we doing this because we think there is, we think this could be bigger, or are we saying we have to do it because there's a policy, even though it's just 1 or 2%, we have something there. But as a collective for all of us, and I'm just not talking about HEC and CLP, who are making investments for the time being, by having something here, how might it help to educate the players in Hong Kong? And I'm talking about all of us, our students, our engineers, our professionals, the NGOs, the users, into understanding the new picture that is coming, which is a complete energy transformation in the world if we're going to have a chance to deal with climate change. So can we look at these kinds of investments with a new eye? So is it an investment that Hong Kong people will benefit from in the longer term? Okay. Again, these kinds of products are in fact going to be produced by Hong Kong invested companies in the PRD. We've had some problem, some complaint here about a electric vehicle designed in Hong Kong, a very small and light vehicle that is not able to get on the street in Hong Kong because it's regarded as unsafe. And we already know in the past that we had, the Segway machine that again was not allowed to go onto the street in Hong Kong. In the future, we're going to have to argue about electric bicycles, whether they're going to be allowed to go on the streets in Hong Kong as a major form of public transport, not just for recreation. So I think we have that kind of issue if we're looking at Hong Kong and how we're going to integrate the transport and the urban planning system to think about how we are going to function and live differently in this city. Innovation. I think many of us thought, well, Hong Kong Science Park going into one single project, the chief executive actually highlighted this in his policy address last year, and the financial secretary made a big push in his budget. And we can poo-poo that, but I think if we were to think a little bit more deeply and say, is this the beginning of something? Because they are looking at doing thin film solar. And if China, as a production center, like we have been able to do solar panels cheaply enough, we will be able to supply the world with cheaper products. And even though we might not be applying solar in a major way in our own neck of the woods, we shouldn't see that our ability to produce technology and products that are cheap, that the rest of the world can use, as something negative. It surely is something very positive. Again, administration. These whole issues about subsidies, about pricing, how China is going to deal with that in the future is very important. And I won't go into any details, but this is obviously something to watch. But also for us in Hong Kong, what are the policy transits? And if we're talking about price, we obviously need to talk a lot more about carbon pricing and pricing of energy going forward, because that is going to be a necessary path. But the political constraint seems to be so much that our policymakers find it extraordinarily difficult to think about how that could happen. Rural supplies. Actually, the rural area in Guangdong is incredibly important for Hong Kong. How they deal with environmental issues in terms of clean air, clean water, clean energy is very important for us here as well, because it affects our air quality, it affects our water quality. Hong Kong gets its food source essentially from southern China, and of course we also get energy. We are supplied with nuclear power energy from across the border, and perhaps in the future other types of energy. And then lastly, of course, about price. I won't go into that, but I hope that today we go away understanding that the whole energy picture, that transformation that is going to take place, is actually quite an exciting one. So perhaps what we should do is have another seminar on clean power, renewable power, perhaps in the next 12 to 18 months, because surely by then Copenhagen would have taken place. We would know a little bit more about how the world looks at pricing, and also I think the technological transit would have taken place. Some of the measures that the Hong Kong government have put in place, like voluntary audits and voluntary building codes and so on, perhaps they would be more ready in the next 18 months to actually make it more aggressive, that they may be able to tell us that these are now going to be mandatory. So the picture is going to be shifting all the time. But perhaps at this stage we need to stop. Thank you very much for spending the morning with us, and please help me to give a warm hand to our guest speakers. Just the last piece of advertising. On the 28th of November, Civic Exchange will be hosting a transportation and clean air conference in Hong Kong. So that we'll be going into what other cities are doing. We'll be going into electric vehicles and what role they can play. We'll be advertising that after the summer, and we look forward to seeing you. So thank you very much again.